大変お待たせいたしました。それでは続いてのプログラムをご紹介いたします。続いては国境を越えて、世界の規制当局が今お金のルールを書き換えると題しまして4名のスピーカーを、ご紹介いたします。元ホワイトハウス顧問ペヌンブラストラテジーズ CEO キャロル・ハウス様、英国金融行動監視機構イノベーション部門責任者コーリン・ペイン様、シンガポール金融管理局金融インフラ人工知能オフィスディレクター兼責任者アラン・リム様にご登壇いただきます。そしてモデレーターにシンガポール国立大学アジアデジタルファイナンス研究所客員准教授チアテックユー様に務めていただきます。Now let me introduce our next program. The next session is titled Beyond Borders: How Regulators Around the World Are Writing the Rules for the Next Financial System. We're pleased to welcome the following speakers. Carol House from Penumbra Strategies, Colin Payne from Financial Conduct Authority UK, and Alan Lim from Financial Infrastructure and Artificial Intelligence Office, Monetary Authority of Singapore. And we have the moderator for this session is Chia Tek Yu from NUS, Asian Institute of Digital Finance. それでは皆様、大きな拍手でお迎えください。Now please welcome our speakers with a big round of applause. Thank you very much. The stage is yours.
Lights up, right? So, good morning, everybody. We've got 30 minutes for a very interesting panel. So, good morning. I'm Teck Yu. I think that, as we stand in early 2026 now, the global financial infrastructure is undergoing a fundamental shift, right? And I think it's driven by two very big catalysts. One is obviously Gen AI, and this whole maturing of blockchain in the tokenization world. So today we have got three panelists, all coming from different regions, all coming from a strong regulatory background, and we are looking to them for guidance as to how we navigate this journey into the future. So without further ado, let me just start with Alan, given fellow Singaporeans here. So MAS has actually moved from sort of exploring AI assistants, chatbots, co-pilots and all, to really overseeing AI with transactional authority. So very much in the agentic AI space. So how is MAS ensuring financial stability when the digital co-workers making such decisions are operating at speeds that humans cannot track?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, and glad to be here. So the way that I'll frame this is as such, because I think it will probably be helpful as we speak about the work that we are doing. Just more generally speaking, the way that we look at new innovation and new technology that appears in the space, I think there's the policy lens, which I think a lot of focus and attention has been on. You could say a large part of it is driven by policymakers, a large part is driven by the official or the public sector. But I think the other piece that we think is very important when approaching new technology is also the industry lens. How do you actually operationalize this new technology? What are emerging use cases which can be unlocked through the use of this technology? So I think those two pieces really need to come hand in hand, the policy side and the industry side. And the way that we've approached this is as follows. I'll use AI perhaps as an example. I know there's a lot of attention around generative AI recently as an understatement, but I think if we kind of think about it, AI in itself, it's not really new per se. I think a lot of foundational work has been done around thinking about how we handle data, for one. And for many institutions and jurisdictions, there's been a lot of thinking around how do we approach AI. Within MES, we've started many years ago, the core principles around fairness, around ethics, accountability, and transparency, right? So I think these key principles would still apply even in today's context. Do we need to enrich it and extend it? Perhaps to consider new and emerging risk, and also look at new use cases that could be unlocked. So with that as a foundation, we've put out a set of guidelines that touches across different spheres, whether it's from a tech and cyber risk perspective, but also how do we approach model risk governance. And more recently, we've put out a consultation paper around model risk governance, or rather an updated view on AI risk management. So that's something that we hope to really provide, or rather provide an opportunity to engage with the wider ecosystem and get feedback in terms of whether the existing regulatory guidelines is clear, and also provide, hopefully, the space and the comfort for the industry to innovate. Now, let me flip over to the industry lens for a bit. I think what has been very helpful in shaping policy, but also in driving not just individual institutions to develop their use case, but really to catalyze the ecosystem, is for different folks to come together, and there are different levers for that. There are sandboxes, different jurisdictions do that. And from our perspective, we certainly support sandboxes for new technologies. But one thing that we found very helpful was for the industry to come together and define not just the individual use cases, but are there common practices and standards in which people can come together. So that could be standards around tokenization. How do we approach, for example, tokenizing specific financial assets, around use of stable coins, but it could also apply to the use of AI. So one recent consortium or group of financial institutions that came together was around AI risk management. So this consortium called MindForge, it's really made up of leading banks, asset managers, insurers, that have come together to define what the framework is for AI risk management. So the AI risk management framework would go really hand in hand with how we've, or what we're really thinking about in terms of the regulatory guidelines for how risk should be managed. So, so that's a quick example of how these two, in a way, hands could really clap. And then with that, I think hopefully we'll be able to support greater innovation, but done in a responsible way.
Thank you, Alan. There's also Pathfinder.ai as well, right? So lots going on in Singapore. So Colin, with the UK's new crypto asset authorization gateway opening late last year, it looks like growth is a real priority for UK. So how do you balance this pro-innovation stance without becoming sort of a soft entry point into the global financial system?
Yeah, it's a question I get asked a lot. I'm the head of innovation, so naturally I'm going to come in and want to disrupt. I'm going to want to push at the boundaries, the edges, and that usually influences the kind of positioning I might well have in the FCA. But I'm one of a small minority of not lawyers in my organization. You know, I have 5,000 lawyers and there's a few of us. So I have a pretty robust discussion point with most of those well-seasoned regulators who look at it from the risk angle. So I'd say it's not so much as we're looking at growth or risk. We're looking at both together. It has to be balanced. And in fact, actually, when you talk about industry is not wanting just to grow with no constraints. It's not wanting to have zero regulation. All the feedback we have is that it's an important area to protect the moat. You know, it's important. It's important for consumer safety. We don't. Most people are doing things for the right reasons. So there is a way you can have growth and risk managed and balanced. The way we do it, I guess it's not dissimilar to our friends in MAS. We believe policy and industry come together. We probably have stepped into it even more in that we have a very active lab-based system where we work together with industry to develop new ideas, new concepts, and that informs our policy. We call it agile policy. It's a way of feedback directly into the policy frameworks. So the one you mentioned, yes, we're going into the process, and it's going to be interesting to compare to the States, because obviously the States went very fast into legislation, and now I would suspect we might hear there's going to be a period of rule-based writing, which could take years from our experience of these things. What we've done is slightly different. We issued the consultation, as you say. It was 658 pages of consultation, 3 of them, issued just before Christmas. Always a great Christmas present for our friends. But we obviously have the horizon in mind. In August, we start to open the perimeter. People have to apply. They have to be aware of how tough it's going to be. So there is no situation of softening in the UK. I think probably if there's one jurisdiction you could point to in crypto that has not been soft, it's the UK. You know, we were the ones who didn't let FTX in, for example. There have been many other examples. So I think we are always going to be clear with our rule-based systems. It's going to be, as always, principles-based and outcomes-focused, always for us. And it allows us to be as rigorous as we all need to be with new technologies and with new products and services, and balance the idea of growth and risk. And I'm hoping, actually, because we don't have any Europeans with us, so I can say that, and I'm sure there's 1 or 2 in the audience. Obviously, through Brexit, there was a lot of pain coming out of the European system. But what it has done, the one dividend I think it now gives us, is the flexibility to be independent in our thinking. So whilst Europe has MiCA, and the States has something else, we sit in the middle, and we try to provide a really balanced, trusted framework which allows our firms to be really confident in applying to in this case, the crypto assets area.
So turning to Carol for the US. So I think beyond the licensing and registration, right? We see the US having a very strong focus on resilience of the dollar, right, as well as prevention of illicit finance. But as the new financial system becomes increasingly digitized, decentralized, what is the biggest cultural shift that you have observed in how US policymakers are viewing this, right, in terms of risks and opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's a really poignant topic because it hints at some of the interesting developments that we've had in the U.S. There's nothing controversial going on our side of the ocean. But so I'll say that, like as you mentioned, issues like dollar dominance have been stated as top priority for this administration. It was also listed as top priority in the Biden administration in our executive order on digital assets. Like, we specifically established U.S. competitiveness in technology and in our centrality in the financial system as a priority. But I think there's been some interesting tensions on where policy meets practice and what actual implementation has looked like, and where there's been some fracture inside of really every U.S. administration that I've worked under, focusing on crypto policy, has had some version of these tensions, and they look very distinct in each one. So I think right now, like, certainly a huge focus on competitiveness and deregulation has been stated very clearly as a priority. And so where it's been explicitly and then implicitly directed, including a lot of work for AML on counter-threat finance, we've been issuing a lot of requests for information, largely very, very clearly articulated questions around cost and not a ton around benefit. So there's a big issue or concern that I have around the fact that I do think that when it comes to AML and threat finance frameworks generally, I don't think that the global system has figured out a really great way of assessing and evaluating what those metrics are and being able to really understand and defend the efficacy of these frameworks. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart because I hear a lot of people criticize AML, and AML deserves a relook and a revamp. But I'm so glad that this administration, like the 2 before it, have emphasized the need to embrace innovative technology. This one has really leaned in more on creating the clear pathways into how to use it, which I think is a really important is an important shift that the last administration really struggled with. Like, I think truly if the SEC under our last administration had just provided a clear pathway into registration and supervision and paired that with an enforcement approach, because while I'm a policy wonk, I'm also an operator at heart. I was an Army officer, and like, implementation policy that isn't implemented is feckless. If we had prioritized enforcement against the most egregious violators, in the ecosystem, not against those that are the easiest to wrap our arms around, who are often the U.S. operating firms. And I still credit the U.S. sector as being probably the most compliant sector in the world, and a really vibrant and competitive one too, because we've had a framework, a fragmented one and a patchwork one, but one in place for longer than anyone else in the world. But we've had very key pieces missing where other nations like the UK and Europe came together and really created that interconnective tissue in a way that we had missed. So I think that it's important for us to think about where these shifts and desires to deregulate, the desire for dominance, but also paired with things like we've forsaken direct regulatory control and oversight over the largest US dollar denominated peer-to-peer money transfer system in the world. And I don't think that's consistent with thinking about dollar dominance and needing to make sure that the dollar, which people use and rely upon because of their trust in it and our economy, like, I think that there's a need for us to rethink around some of those trends. But overall, definitely a huge trend towards innovation, competitiveness, technology, and maybe less of a focus on safety, and a bit of a dismantling of the enforcement apparatus.
So maybe turning back to Alan, right? If you look at whether intended or unintended outcome, right, of US dollar stable coins, they've all come into Southeast Asia in particular, right? The emerging markets, buy US dollar stable coin as a store of value, right? And not just for, cross-border payments or anything else. So it's used for domestic as well. How are ASEAN regulators reacting to that, right? Given the impact on monetary policy, capital controls, is there a conversation amongst ASEAN regulators as to maybe a joint response to it, or is it left to individual regulators at this point?
Well, I can't speak for ASEAN as a whole, but I think I think just general observation and in conversations, I guess, with peers internationally, I think whether it's in fact in more established markets or emerging markets, I think it's still down to questions around what are use cases for stable coins. Is it really to facilitate crypto trading activity, or are there real economic activities surrounding it for things like payments, for example, more efficient payments and use cases? So I think a lot of awareness building needs to be there. I think there are emerging use cases. So I think we need to really look at the vast volume of traffic, for example, that's using stable coins, how much of it is actually for real economic activity. The other piece that I think needs to be looked at, quite apart from the currency that's being used to, let's say, a particular stablecoin is pegged against, I think it's the question around things like reserve management of those stablecoins. Where is it going to be based and so forth? Is it going to be a single jurisdiction issuance? Is it going to be multi-jurisdiction issuance? So I think those are things that probably needs to be evolved, because that associated with that are risk factors and concerns that regulators need to look at. Carol did mention conversations around AML, CFT. So I think that needs to be looked at as well. Increasingly, we are not looking at more traditional intermediaries facilitating financial services. We are looking at potentially self-custodial wallets. So what's that going to look like? Potentially in the future, we're looking at agents being that interface, and agents with agents. So what's the delegation that's involved and so forth? So I think those are things that we probably need to look at. And I think the existing considerations and cooperation channels, I think, will exist, and it's probably going to be bilateral, multilateral, and I think it's just going to evolve as in the years to come.
So Colin, this goes straight into your area, right? You lead FCI's AI lab. You lead the GFTN network. So with over 90 regulators collaborating, what is the single biggest border or friction point that still prevents a unified global standard, right, for digital assets and AI governance, right? So rather than bilateral agreements, which is often very, very difficult, how are you actually addressing this, and where do you see the future going?
It's a difficult question to answer because I think there's several layers to the answer. You mentioned GFTN, so I do chair the Global Financial Innovation Network. It's got 98 global regulators as part of it, and including my friends, obviously at MAS, and my friends in the States. That's a very practical answer to a very difficult problem. As innovators, we recognize, and regulators, we recognize we're in quite a unique position to help. So that's the kind of backdoor entry system. We work together in ways that are unlocking thinking, first of all. I've switched it very much from a kind of paper-driven exercise to an experimental exercise. So the topics that we're working on currently, AI, tokenization, and quantum, 3 difficult areas to get progress. And by doing that, I can bring, for example, I had a roundtable yesterday at another venue with 17 regulators in the room to discuss the kind of ideas around agentic payments, agentic AI, some of the stuff that we were just talking about. The flow of data is really useful because then we can use that data, start to experiment, use our sandbox, which is a very practical example of how to come into an environment and build stuff, because our sandboxes are real. They're not just a pure regulatory sandbox, they're digital. And they're backed by NVIDIA, they're backed by AWS, they've got Radium, we've got one of the best synthetic data sets available. So we can actually build stuff and test some of this interoperability. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got the IOSCOs and the FSBs of this world, the multilateral framework providers who were doing really well. Well, I mean, they do as well as they can do in complex circumstances. But we're in a slightly different worldview now. I'm not going to look anywhere in particular, but things have changed geopolitically over the last 3 years. And we have to think very carefully about how we structure a response to that. And I think actually bilateral, trilateral, multilateral, and expanded protocols allow you to demonstrate something that works, which can then be taken to others and shared, as long as you have a sort of open source mindset. You've got to come into this and think, look, we're trying to work for the benefit of society, not for the benefit of just the UK or the States or Singapore or whoever else. We're trying to pull this together. It's a complicated, difficult, new technology. So I think we have to do it in different ways, in different velocities, and to try and each other to try and help move forward. I think that's the way we work.
So Kara, maybe just to follow on that. So the UK operates its own digital security sandbox. The US prioritizes national security in financial technology. So how are your jurisdictions collaborating to ensure that a digital asset issued in London and a dollar-backed stablecoin managed in the US don't end up hitting a digital wall?
Yeah, and I know since I was in the last administration, but and now still work and support different agencies, but I know obviously Colin would be well placed on the active cooperation that's happening. But I will say that the relationship at the civil servant level certainly continues to persist. Like amazing credibility, amazing partnerships, certainly with both of the nations that are represented here, but also with so many of our partners. Those ties continue in talking about best practices and what our frameworks are that are in place. I know that certainly with the Genius Act and our stablecoin framework being put in place, there is an expectation and certainly a priority being driven by our administration to try to help get that interoperability is going to kind of look like getting other jurisdictions to adopt our framework. I think there's certainly a lot of interest from other jurisdictions that have had many years of running these licensing regimes, of trying to instead figure out what mapping like the corollaries to each other ends up looking like, so that you can have that portability. So I'm sure that there's going to be some very interesting discussions and negotiations on that front. I know many countries that have already expressed some concern to me, and some just interest in moving that process along, because it's going to take time to figure out what that passportability looks like. But I'm so glad that you brought up this issue of like the transnational partnership issue, because with crypto, with AI infrastructure, like certainly with quantum, all of this stuff ends up relying upon digital rails and infrastructure that we know operates with actors and activity that's operating cross borders, like without account for different obligations, and it's resulting in a lot of questions and concerns around how do we do things like mitigate illicit finance risk, but also mitigate the concerns of like tech exploitation in the pervasive fraud and like content authenticity crisis that we're also facing right now. So I think that in that world with AI, there's a lot of concerns around data sovereignty, Certainly many countries have already expressed concern, even frameworks in Europe definitely that want to keep information held. China certainly takes an approach of maintaining data within their borders. And I know on the US side, there's definitely a lot more interest and in fact some public reporting about this administration's push to try to make sure that those silos don't end up limiting the ability to garner the benefits that you get from information flows and data access that make things a lot better, including AI models and lots of different commerce benefit from data sharing. But we've also seen the negative consequences that can come from data sharing if it's not done so securely and with like proper considerations of data minimization and use. So I think there's definitely some interesting points and tensions that are going to continue on that front across AI and with crypto, and then definitely with quantum and this moment that we're heading toward where once Q Day hits, like what ends up happening when cross-border critical infrastructure and telecommunications rails end up potentially being vulnerable to a cryptanalytically relevant quantum computer.
I was just going to say that I'm on the Transatlantic Task Force, so in terms of the current discussions, it is really interesting. Being in an environment where we're discussing sovereignty in 2026 with our strongest allies is an interesting place to be, but it is something we have to recognize and work with. And I think the interoperability question is really critical because others will be concerned around dollarization, of course. I think sterling doesn't have the same kind of concerns that maybe ASEAN might have. And actually, I announced yesterday I've got my first sterling stablecoins up and in my own digital sandbox, which is great news for the UK because we see that as it's obviously a trusted currency globally, and we think we need some more balance in life. You know, it's a very Japanese thing, getting to a very balanced position. So I'm enjoying the conversations with your colleagues over in Washington.
So Carol, you mentioned something about quantum that caught my attention. So, you know, with the work you've been doing in the White House and SC, how concerned should we be about the quantum conundrum, right? The security risks, encryption standards, and how are you now advising firms to architect resilience?
I'm really concerned about the security aspect. I'm very excited about all the other positive economic growth aspects that you can get, like quantum computing and edge computing. Like these are some of the foundational computing capabilities that are just going to continue to skyrocket things like AI applications. So I'm very excited about quantum sensing, communications, computing. But on the security side, the idea that certainly, and looking at cryptocurrency, most of the cryptography that cryptocurrency is reliant upon is extremely vulnerable to a cryptanalytically relevant quantum computer. Not to mention that a lot of other asymmetric cryptography that's built into a lot of other methods that we've used because it was a very hard math problem to solve until now or in the near future when this comes about. So I'm very concerned because cybersecurity is already an issue that we have a very hard time getting institutions to invest in, and it takes a very long time. This is a massive upscaling and modernization and refactoring that we have to do of our infrastructure. So when you think about something that needs to be taking 5 to 10 years to try to evolve like the entirety of the financial sector, energy, communications, like those are probably some of the sectors in defense that I would prioritize in all of it, just because I need those things to work to not collapse the economy. But really all critical infrastructure sectors needing to think about it. And I think people don't understand how long it's going to take. Like there's not going to be a one size fits all solution unless I will say that the benefits of hosting infrastructure on cloud and these hyperscalers, that when they implement quantum safe cryptography, that will end up reaping the benefits of that. When they do it, then your infrastructure is benefited. So I'm advising folks to be thinking about long term. They need to be doing inventories. They need to be thinking about what their modernization looks like, including if things like outsourcing some of the hosting of those services may end up meaning that then that entity is responsible for maintaining the agility and security that's needed.
Thank you. I've been told we've got 1 minute. So a very quick rapid fire round. So if we reconvene in 2030, what is the one border that will have completely disappeared in the financial system? And which one will be even more fortified?
Okay, so for me, by the way, that was a brilliant answer. I wouldn't have added anything to that. That was awesome about about quantum. So the one that will disappear, I think, settlement. I think what we're coming to now is the next 3 years. Once we get those interoperability standards in place, and we get the adoption of stablecoin as a means of and a use case for serious settlement, it'll be instant settlement, instant and transparent settlement, and programmable. So I think settlement will disappear. I think trust will become the most hard edge for everything we do, and lack of trust will be our biggest scare in the next 3 to 5 years. When we lose it, we've lost it. So financial services relies on it.
Alan?
I think that the way that financial services may be, the way it's delivered may change, but I think a lot of the core functions, borrowing, lending, payments, I think that those will be there. So I think it's about unbundling and perhaps rebundling of services.
And Carol, the US always has the last words.
Yeah, I'll just plus one on the trust bit. We have not invested in the trust tech infrastructure that would have prepared us better for this moment. Certainly in the US, we're very behind. In fact, both of these jurisdictions on things like digital identity and trust tech architecture and like just content authenticity, that's where we need to be investing and pointing our time.
Okay, and with that, we have to end the session. So let me thank the panelists, and I think we have got great insights from the regulators, and that will guide your decisions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers. We'll have a photo session, so please gather in the center of the stage. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Another round of applause for the speakers. Thank you so much. 大きな拍手をお願いいたします。ありがとうございました。国境を越えて世界の規制当局が今お金のルールを書き換えるというセッションをお送りいたしました。ありがとうございました。